back in 2021, US federal agencies finalized 3,257 new regulations. Now that year's Federal Register, which really is just a daily record containing presidential documents and new and amended regulations, came in also a massive 74,352 pages. All of which raises an obvious question. Why are the feds producing so much new regulation? Now, we economists have three theories to explain why we see so many rules, mandates, and directives coming from Washington. But they stem from very, very different worldviews about the effectiveness and intentions of government. First, and the most romantic, is the public interest theory of regulation. This basically says that well-meaning governments generate regulations because they perceive them to be in our national interest. Think of all those market failures you've been taught about by your teachers. You've got externality problems like pollution, or companies with monopoly power ripping off customers. Well, the public interest theory says that governments step in to correct these market failures. They try to take the best evidence to carefully ensure they implement policies that have benefits greater than costs to society. And that means their aim is for rules to improve our social well-being. But is that really how the government works? Well, there's two other theories here. The next one is that of regulatory capture. And this basically says that regulatory agencies, far from acting in the public interest, can actually act in the interests of the industries they're supposed to regulate. This occurs when the industries being regulated are able to influence the agency's decisions by perhaps activating some of the 12,600 estimated lobbyists here in DC, professionals whose whole job it is to try and influence legislation and regulation. Over time, the regulated industry might come to actually dominate the agency, perhaps even putting in personnel who used to work in the sector, shaping its own regulations to serve the company's interests rather than the public's interests. The risk here being that the regulations are ineffective or even detrimental to the public interest, but really good for the companies or industries being regulated. Now finally, there's the broader public choice theory of regulation. This just says that the political process for determining regulation is often driven by the same sorts of incentives and self-interest that drive ordinary market economic decisions. Bureaucrats and politicians may initiate regulation, not because it's in the interests of the public, but because it serves their own interests. Perhaps it gives them more prestige, or a bigger power base in government. Perhaps it helps a constituency that supports them, such as trade unions or groups of businesses in their district, setting the politician on course for being better known nationally, or else maybe even just enhancing their re-election prospects. Now, when we look at specific examples of regulation, it's actually quite easy to see that regulations come about because of strange coalitions of interests, meaning that these theories are perhaps not as necessarily distinct as they might sound. An economist by the name of Bruce Yandel called one such hybrid theory the bootlegger and Baptist model of regulation. And that was a reference to the period of US alcohol prohibition. Alcohol prohibition was supported by some people who genuinely thought it was good for society, and so in the public interest to outlaw the production, sale, and consumption of alcohol. That included the Southern Baptists. But it was also supported by bootleggers, those making, distributing, or selling the alcohol illegally. Why? Well, because they had a financial interest in alcohol being banned. It raised the price of the product, and so increased the profitability of what they were doing. Now, when we think about many of today's political fights, say about regulating big tech, we see similar interests align. It's certainly the case that many in Congress sincerely believe that curbing companies such as Google, Apple, and Meta is in the public interest because they see these companies as monopolies with monopoly power. But the political momentum for new regulation is certainly often spurred on by competitors to these companies too, including newspapers who compete for advertising revenue with those social media companies, as well as companies who perhaps just don't like the conditions that are imposed on them for selling on, say, Amazon's marketplace or Apple's App Store. Sometimes too, politicians and staffers who want new powers for the Federal Trade Commission or, say, the Department of Justice to control the sector are very active in lobbying for new laws and regulations on these companies. So why does regulation arise? Well, we've heard three theories presented by economists: public interest theories, rent-seeking theories, and public choice theories. And we might summarise that as a joint model as that of Baptists, bootleggers and bureaucrats.